weather perfect day, if you will. And so thank you for taking an hour out of your day. Right. We'll just go one more minute then, since we're going to start the live stream. All right, so welcome again to our front porch conversation on volunteerism. We are super excited today to have such a distinguished panel to talk about a very important topic in terms of the relevance in our community, which is volunteerism. And this week is a special week. It is also National Volunteer Week, which is one of the reasons why we want to highlight this important topic. So with that, we're going to start off with our introductions. I will start with Liz. Can you introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody. My name is Liz Miller. I'm the Operations and Partnership Director at Love Out Loud in Winston-Salem. And we work to connect volunteers all over the community into opportunities in their areas of passion.
Excellent. Thank you for joining us on the front porch, Liz. Next, we'll come to Amy.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Lytle. I'm the Executive Director of Hands On Northwest North Carolina. We're based here in Winston, but we also serve all of Forsyth, as well as Surrey, Stokes, Davie, Davidson, Yakins, and now Iredell County. And we mobilize people and organizations that inspire community change. We work with about 500 different nonprofits in our network and engage a couple thousand volunteers a year in service across that network.
Excellent. And Amy also added, it is Global Volunteer Month as well.
It is. It's not just National Volunteer Week. It's actually a global movement. We are part of the Points of Light Global Affiliate Network. So we're one of about 300 other affiliates, not just here in the US, but across the globe.
Awesome. All right. And next we'll come to Tash.
Good afternoon to my distinguished friends across the Volunteer Network. I'm Tash Lane. I am the Director for Strategic Volunteer Engagement for United Way of Forsyth County, which focuses primarily on Forsyth County. And what we try to do is connect our corporate and individual donors with volunteer opportunities that align with their objectives and interests. So thank you for having me.
Excellent. And welcome to our front porch. And so we'll get started with our first question. And so the first question that we'll talk about today is, just to start off, why is volunteerism important? Why is volunteerism important? So we'll start with Amy. Why is volunteerism important, Amy?
Why is it important? Because I think it's vital to how we show up in our civic and community spaces, right? It's not just about nonprofits providing services in a most effective and efficient manner, which is certainly a key part of it, but it's also about just sort of how do we build social bonds in our community? How do we connect across differences in our community? And how can we work together to make change? And service and volunteering is a key part of that. Clearly, there are parts that we do not live in a perfect world. I think we can point to any numerous things about that. And service is definitely a strategy for how we can amplify and accelerate change. And so it's really important for that. And because it's something that we can all do together. It's something that we believe everyone can do. It's not based on a socioeconomic status. It's not based on other demographics. It's something that we can all do together to move our community forward.
Excellent. So we'll come to you, Tash. Same question. Why is volunteerism important?
To dovetail off of what Amy was sharing, the one word I think about with volunteerism is satisfaction. And there is a innate drive to be satisfied, but amongst the folks that we work with United Way, our corporate donors, our individuals, and our agencies. There is a limit, or there is this drive for satisfaction, and that is to fulfill its goal and mission. With our corporate donors and our corporations, though, they have infused this sense of service and giving back in their organizational mission. So that's one piece. Our agencies are always looking to have additional hands, additional thought partners to help with projects around their property and around their communities and with their programs. And of course, with individuals seek an innate sense of satisfaction that they're giving back to make a difference. Also, to give them some level of importance and value of what they're gaining and what they're able to give. So, Amy, thank you for starting us off. And I just wanted to dovetail and add those bits of information about the importance of volunteerism.
Excellent. All right, Liz, you're up.
I definitely agree with everything Amy and Tash have said. I think the only thing I would add is volunteering is important because it makes the community come alive. There's a theologian, Howard Thurman, that says, don't ask yourself what the world needs, but ask yourself what makes you come alive, and go do that, because what the world needs is more people who have come alive. And when people have found their place in volunteering, when people have found unity in their community, in a neighborhood, doing a gardening project together, or making birthday bundles for families who use the food pantry at crisis control, or painting a house together, and they're able to pair their passions with their community, find the ways that they're not so different from the people who live on the other side of 52, find ways that we're all really looking for a community together. And you kind of see, I see Amber Harris on here, the spark, as she says, of community coming together. That's really what's exciting. And who doesn't want to live in a community that's alive?
That's a great way of phrasing it, Liz. Thank you for adding that. Making the community and individuals come alive. To that, just kind of a follow-up, can someone talk a little bit about maybe what are some of the personal health benefits to volunteering, as well as volunteering in terms of the nonprofit sector, right? A lot of times nonprofits have a limited budget and different things like that. So why is it important to volunteer from a nonprofit standpoint? And what are some of the personal health benefits that come along with volunteering? Anybody can jump in on that.
I think the national research has really shown over the last 5 or 6 years that there are significant personal health benefits to the volunteer when they volunteer, not just mental health, which I think would be the most obvious one. You know, as you said, Tosh, those feelings of satisfaction, the desire to be part of something that's greater than yourself, but actual physical benefits like lower heart pressure, less heart disease, and people who volunteer regularly. So really concrete benefits, especially for those who are older. If for no other reason, that's a certain amount of physical activity and social connection, both of which have also been shown to have significant health benefits. And I think the other piece around the nonprofit, yes, obviously it's a cost-saving measure. We always tend to challenge nonprofits, though, to think about what I would consider top shelf reasons for engaging volunteers, that it's not just about money. We always say, if you get that Mackenzie Scott call, why would you still want to engage volunteers? And it's really because volunteers can really serve a unique role in a nonprofit that's outside of just, we can't afford to pay staff to do certain things. It's about, they can be community advocates. They bring a certain level of credibility, of oversight, of transparency into your organization. So it's more than just, I think, the most obvious kind of economic benefits, but these kind of, again, back to this idea of social cohesion, of being integrated with the community, that's as beneficial to the nonprofits as it is to the volunteers themselves.
Excellent.
And going off that, we're created as communal human beings. We're not meant to live super isolated. We're not meant to live in our bubbles. And going out and volunteering, both for an individual and for the nonprofit, creates these cool ecospheres of individuals outside of your typical. So organizations can bring new contextual understanding, new experiences, new friends, new partners, new learning. to volunteers, and volunteers can bring new interests, ways of thinking about things, strategic ideas, creative frameworks to nonprofits that they maybe wouldn't have thought of with just the people in their board or their staff.
And I think about our young folks in our school systems, in our churches, in our neighborhoods, who may not have opportunities on their own to build their skills and interests. We have multiple segments of youth organizations in our community here in Forsyth County that engage in hands-on thinking volunteer opportunities that will supplement and complement what they're learning in the classroom. And that gets the opportunity for them to think about what they want to do for the rest of their lives, builds their skills and their socialization and relationships. And it keeps them grounded, at least relationship or organizing, and thinking about all those elements of how they can grow themselves within a volunteer sphere. So from the young elementary school child to our senior, being engaged and connected to our work through service and volunteerism is a really big part of the work that we do, and why this work with nonprofits is so important. So a couple of things to add there.
Absolutely. And those are great answers to those questions, and really kind of highlight the benefits of volunteering. And so we'll segue into our next question. And so we started off with why volunteerism is important. So what are some of the issues facing volunteerism from your perspective? And so we'll start this time with Liz. What are some of the issues facing volunteerism, not just on a broad sense, but right here in Forsyth County?
I think one issue facing volunteerism is just polarization. We get so polarized with our own views, with our own networks, and we make issues, big or small, bigger than community. And so we don't want to partner in a certain area because we've heard it's unsafe, or we don't want to work with this organization because we're not sure we agree with their, 10 points of social justice. But really, when you think about the community as a whole, you think about essential programs. What's more important than making sure every child has food on their table? What's more important than making sure everybody in our community has housing? So I think sometimes we let relatively small issues become bigger than the community as a whole. I think even from the other end of things, on an organizational perspective, something that makes it hard is we're all looking for the best volunteers. Everybody wants the senior adult that's retired, that wants to work for your organization full time and brings the perfect skill set and is there 40 hours a week, and also has an endowment that they're going to set up for your organization. Like, that is the dream person. But we don't necessarily create avenues for what Tasha's talking about, the young adults who maybe, think they might have a passion for education, but can't really find anywhere to serve there. Or the young adults who maybe a traditional four-year college isn't their plan, but they're really great with their hands and they want to do construction, but nowhere will let them volunteer until they're 18. Or the single parent who really cares about a specific area but can't commit to serving somewhere every week. We don't really create avenues for those individuals to still, get their hands dirty, to still get down in the mix of things, to still volunteer. Or when we do, it seems like it's maybe less valued and less important to the organization. So from an individual point of view, maybe thinking more about the community as a whole and less about specific parameters. And from an institutional organizational point of view, maybe thinking creatively about how you can engage outside of the scope of your perfect or ideal volunteer.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Liz. That offers so much context, and I want to delve deeper into that, but we'll maybe come back to that, that ideal volunteer. We'll jump over to Amy really quickly. What are your thoughts around the issues facing volunteerism?
I mean, I think, the pandemic really saw obviously a big decrease in volunteerism. I think it's also saw a big decrease in senior volunteers. And I'm not entirely sure that all of those are going to come back. As Liz said, I don't think that quote unquote ideal volunteer really exists anymore in the world post-pandemic. I will say though that research done over the last 2 years has really shown that the most civically engaged generation right now is actually Gen Z, the Zoomers. It's not the boomers. It's not actually those older folks. If those older folks are getting out and going around, they're traveling, they're not necessarily doing the same level of civic engagement work that younger generations are doing. So that's something to keep in mind. I also think this idea around being creative, as Liz said, on the institutional side, about really trying to find roles for the people in front of you rather than finding the perfect square peg to fit your square hole. It's a whole different kind of paradigm shift for a lot of nonprofits. And also, I think there's a kind of a reframing that we need to think about too. Like volunteering is a very white middle class word. And that's been shown over and over again. And it's really thinking about, what does service look like? How do people show up in a civic engagement space? How can we be more inclusive in what we value, as to get back to some of the points that Liz made about service, about who can be served versus those that traditional power dynamic between those who serve and those who are being served, I think needs to come undone. We've been doing lots of work around, how do you create equitable environments within volunteer programs? How do you build that culture of belonging within your volunteer program? I think that work really needs to happen for a lot of volunteer programs to continue to be relevant, for lack of a better word, to really be able to tap into new trends and what we're seeing in terms of what the world of volunteerism is going to look like in the next 3 to 5 years, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Great answer, Amy. We'll come over to you, Tash. What are the issues facing volunteerism?
Well, Amy, I think you were in my thoughts with my comment, and that was about the professionalism of volunteer engagement. You know, it's not now a willy-nilly kind of approach to volunteering service. You're right. At one point, Amy, you know, it was a very white-oriented kind of service, using the word volunteerism. But there are service opportunities that has been across the board with churches and African-American communities, within groups of Hispanic populations, you know, across the board. I mean, even with United Way, its history is founded in trying to solve an issue, trying to solve a problem. And right now, I hope that volunteerism is not this catchy, trendy thing that's going to go away after a little while. I know people have been doing volunteer work for years under different kind of nuances and activities. But the main thing is about the strengthening of this as a profession. You know, there's certificates that people can attract or grab or earn based on this work. I mean, there's an art and a science to this work. And those who really have no way of knowing that the programming aspect of volunteer work is intense. We make it look good, we make it feel great, but the work behind it is something that's a misnomer if you're not engaged in how it's supposed to look, and you want people to get the best experience from that. And then I think too, in Forsyth County, what I've observed, that our agencies who are the recipients of the volunteer work, of the volunteer time and experience, they have experienced funding waves that have shifted how they do their work on a day-to-day, month-to-month, week-to-week basis. And sometimes that volunteer is not consistent. And that's a challenge, and that's a reality as well. So working with the nuances of what the funding waves look like, and if you do have that volunteer that you love, you work with, and they move away, what do you do? Who do you replace that great worker with? So training and workshops and experiences and getting that volunteer to train the trainer, if you will, are even more important with the growth of volunteerism and volunteer work and service and giving back.
Absolutely. Those are great points, Tash. Just want to kind of touch on a few other things around this same question. And you mentioned training. So one of the main things, or one of the key things that we see with volunteerism, what if you have a volunteer who comes into your organization and they just show up and you just say, hey, we're going to stick you in this place and we just need you to do this task. A lot of times, we may not have the best experience when we see that. So let's talk a little bit about training and also the ideas of recruitment. Where do you find these volunteers? Right? We're talking about it in that sense of they're already here. I know a lot of times there is a lot of work that goes into recruitment and also retention as well. So just those little nuances with that question. Anybody want to take that?
I'll take a stab at it. I think here at United Way, we're very fortunate in that our relationship with the community comes directly from our corporate donors and individual donors right away. I mean, they are our focus, that we work with them intently. And we have a lot of other people who come into our organization because they support that mission of United Way. And with the volunteer piece, we connect them with our agencies. Like I see Habitat for Humanity on the call today. And one great thing about Habitat is they receive volunteers that come through United Way, but they in their organization have a training component that they create for its volunteers for the work that they're doing. So there is a component within some of our agencies who partner with our groups to infuse a training, some type of waiver understanding for the volunteer to be prepared once they get on the job site, the work site for their opportunity. So that really helps with what we're doing. But the recruitment part is also with our affinity groups with United Way, our impact organizations, impact groups, whose focus is primarily around what the United Way mission is, but they want to take that mission and put it to use in their communities where they work, play, and live. And so I think that's very critical as far as getting those volunteers, recruiting those volunteers, and also segmenting on the volunteers, allowing their experience to tell the story and to bring them back and to get other folks in the fold with volunteer work. So just thinking about those two opportunities for training that comes to one of our agencies, our partner agencies, and also with recruiting those organizations and those individuals to be a part of our volunteer network.
Excellent. Liz or Amy, want to talk a little bit about training, recruitment, and retention?
Well, we always talk about that retention is the result of doing everything else right. Right. So the retention is not it's the result, right? That's the result that you want our people. But even the idea of retention is we really think about it in this current moment as sort of instead of that volunteer that's going to come in 4 hours a day, every day, or 4 hours a week, every week for the next 52 weeks for the next 10 years. While that might certainly be easier for the nonprofit, I don't think that's really even the retention goal. This idea of sort of zero retention, where a nonprofit might come in and work with you on a project every year, or might come in and work with you on a certain program and continue to re-engage with you over time. But the role that they might fill might change over time as well. And sort of how are you, just like you shepherd donors, that's a pretty common idea in fund development. How do you shepherd those volunteers kind of through their life cycle and through your life cycle as an organization? So you're not just expecting them to do the same thing over and over and over again, infinitely. And we're seeing lots of trends around sort of short-term projects. And this other piece around training and skills, we certainly do training for nonprofits all the time. We have a volunteer engagement training program that will be coming up probably this summer. It will be $10 because we've gotten some ARPA funding to do that. That's a really great series. It's about 3 full days, nuts and bolts, recruitment. How do you shape volunteers? How do you plan for volunteers appropriately? All that kind of nitty gritty good stuff. But I think in terms of training the volunteers too, I think being able to provide wider context to their work is really important, especially if they're coming in on a short-term basis. If you're coming in and doing what we call kind of done in a day projects, or you're schlepping shovels, as we call them, or doing a gardening project or painting or those kinds of things in a relatively short-term manner, how can you provide that volunteer with a wider context for their work? How can you make sure that you're providing them with the information they need to provide service in a culturally appropriate way, that they really kind of understand the context that their service happens. And I think that's very important. And I think the organizations that are doing well in terms of engagement are kind of figuring that out. And they're also using trusted ambassadors. The best volunteer recruiter is a current volunteer, leveraging their networks to help spread the word and bring people in, being inviting. And again, nonprofits kind of going to where those volunteers that they believe would be good fits are going to be, not expecting the volunteers to just come to them. So I think it's really going to require a shift in thinking on behalf of the nonprofits, because I think sometimes nonprofits still think the volunteer is going to change. The volunteer is not going to change, right? The nonprofit's going to have to kind of really think about, what does engagement look like? What does retention look like? What does success look like for their volunteer program?
I agree with all of that. I think it goes back actually before a volunteer even shows up at your organization, because a volunteer can show up one day and you could do everything right and it still may be a terrible fit for the volunteer. So like Cedric said, you know, some volunteers may love what you explained, just showing up and doing a task and walking out the door. And some volunteers want that deep contextual understanding and to be involved in the systems and the relationships and the talking with the guests at your organization, or the talking with your clients or your staff. And it kind of all starts in the heart of the volunteer and the expectations set and the way that you present your organization and an opportunity. So I think contextual understanding is incredibly important. I also know that not every organization or nonprofit has the capacity to offer this great training on what are the constructs of poverty? How does race affect everything that we're doing? Why are people showing up to the food bank week after week after week? And so it's important to point individuals to other opportunities with organizations who do have the capacity to provide that contextual understanding. I know Crisis Control does training, Neighbors for Better Neighborhoods does training. There's great books out there. Our organization has a whole site on our volunteer platform called Growth and Trainings to point people to these opportunities, knowing that sometimes it is important to have a little bit of contextual learning before you show up at the opportunity. And it's important for the nonprofits to set expectations clearly when you are recruiting volunteers. So if it's the kind of job where you're like, hey, we have a set of tasks and you're going to come in for 90 minutes and the first 15 minutes are going to be orientation, and then we're going to hand you this list and you're going to do the things, find a way to say that. And some people are going to be really excited about the fact that, hey, I'm going to have really clear instructions when I get there and I'm going to be able to do it and I'm not going to worry about things. And if it's more of kind of a highly relational, hey, we're inviting people into our space and we just want you to talk to them and make them feel welcome, and they're going to ask you questions you don't know the answer to, and that's totally okay. Then tell volunteers, hey, if you are an introvert and you hate talking to strangers, like maybe this isn't the opportunity for you, but here's some other ways you can engage with us. Because really volunteers, ultimately, they're not trying to waste their resources. They're not trying to waste your organization's resources and come in and get trained and show up and it be a terrible experience for everybody. They want something where they feel like they belong. They want that satisfaction that Tasha's talking about. They want to feel like they're making a difference and able to transform the community in a small way or transform their own hearts in a small way. So setting expectations, setting clear goals, helping people find avenues to understand better before they show up is only going to provide better retention, better experiences, better relationships with individuals who maybe volunteered once with you and didn't show back up, but can still be great advocates for you because they know that you prepared them well for that moment. And they know that it could be a good fit for somebody in their network that's just a little bit differently wired than them.
Yeah, we talk a lot about that. It's really often volunteer management is a large part expectation management that it's not necessarily what objectively happens in a room on a day, but it's about whether or not that adhered to the expectations that one or the other parties had for what should have happened in the room on the day. Yeah, and that's a key point. It's really about how do you set expectations, how do you communicate that, and how do you tweak going forward.
Excellent. Those are great answers, and learning a lot today. And just in terms of a lot of times we just think that, you show up, there's this volunteer opportunity, but there's so much behind the scenes, so many things that go into it. And so I just love hearing you all, or the experts, kind of talk a little bit about this work. And so we're going to go and segue into our last segment, and we're going to talk a little bit about ways that we can strengthen volunteerism here in Forsyth County. So we talked a little bit about issues. Now we're going to talk about how can we bolster this important resource in our community, which is our volunteers and serving. And so I'll start with you this time, Liz. How can we bolster, strengthen volunteerism here in Forsyth County?
And buy me more coffee, Cedric.
That's it.
No, I think something really important in bolstering volunteerism is organizations learning to work together better. I think our organization, or not our organization, our community has plenty of people capacity, plenty of philanthropic capacity, plenty of resources floating around. But I think something that's really missing from our community is connectedness. So maybe if an individual doesn't fit well at your organization, knowing another organization up the road that you can point them to, or knowing where to point them to increase volunteering. I think when communities work together, when you know who's working in the neighborhood with you, then you can kind of increase the connectedness in that neighborhood, increase the resources moving into that neighborhood, eliminate or at least decrease duplication of services that are unnecessary. And when volunteers don't feel like they're being pulled in a bunch of different directions, maybe they're going to be more willing to serve, or when they feel like, hey, wow, this organization really is talking to the community and listening to them, and talking to the other organizations and listening to them, then they may feel more willing to donate money, donate time, donate resources, because they see that the organization not only cares about their mission or their bottom line or their specific grant funded project, but they care about the community and what it looks like for individuals. I think the other, I go from things from both a volunteer perspective and an organizational perspective. And I think the thing from organizations is be willing to be creative with how you do your volunteering. I know one thing that we hear a lot from volunteers is we really want to serve, but I work an 8-to-5 job. And I need something in the evenings, or I need something on the weekends, or I need something I can bring my 5-year-old to, because I really want to instill the values of investing in your community into them. And it is so hard to find those opportunities in the evenings and on the weekends where you can bring your family, or where you can commit to once a month and serve in meaningful ways. So maybe that means the next volunteer engagement or volunteer manager role that you hire, they work 12 to 8 and they work Tuesday to Saturday. And their goal is to engage volunteers on evenings and weekends. And maybe that means shifting your organizational structure and making yourself a little bit more uncomfortable and a little bit less institutional and a little bit less business as usual, in order to better engage the individuals in the community that you're serving alongside and that are utilizing your resources, and the volunteers who have creative energy and new life to bring into the things that you're doing.
Yeah, I think we really work with our organizations to think about the barriers they put up to volunteers engaging with them, and sort of a lot of those are somewhat artificial. And can you really think about what does it mean if you run a background check on somebody? How do you run a background check on someone who's not documented? Why do you have a 4-page application? And is that application only in English? what is the minimum that you need to have to really kind of properly and safely engage someone in service, and really think about the own organizational barriers that you put up, and the lack of flexibility or the perceived lack of flexibility that the organizations may have to find those opportunities. Really, again, thinking about the creativity, and then thinking about, as you said, the benefits of, if you make those organizational changes, who are the new voices that you can attract, the new energy, the new spirit, as you said, so important.
Absolutely.
I agree with my friends in thinking about, how we can strengthen volunteerism. And one of many thoughts I've had was about just our corporations and our organizations and businesses that have purposely and intentionally and genuinely infused into their workforce, even into their HR benefits packages, this appreciation and expectation that their employees and their associates go into the community and do work as a part of their workday, regular workday. So yes, even outside of the weekend or the evening opportunities, they've infused that in their workday, and really encouraging their employees to seek opportunities during the day to do volunteer work. And I think that in of itself allows opportunities to strengthen volunteerism, because it allows our individuals as a collective within their work environment, even within their community environment, to give back in a way that does not negate or take away from their regular workday activities. And one volunteer I think of right now works for Reynolds, and he works with the Enrichment Center. And he's actually going to be recognized for his volunteer work with the government's leadership award and Governor's Leadership Award. And his work is about supporting what the Enrichment Center is doing with their children. They do a big picnic and a big cookout every year. And that's one of their go-to places when they do volunteer work. And so with that excitement and recognition, I mean, he's very humble about the opportunity, but he's not doing it for the recognition. He does it because, number one, that's in his DNA to do that. But number two, his organization, his company supports him in that. I mean, it's a part of their plan to encourage their employees to do, a day of caring with their team. And so that, to me, lets us know as a community that our companies and businesses here in Forsyth County support that. And at the same vein, for us to be prepared for that. When you have a corporation of 600 some employees who are all at once looking for volunteer opportunities, our organizations need to be ready for that. And we are. And our agencies also are excited about that as well, to be ready for the extra hands that are willing to give time, talent, and their treasure towards these volunteer opportunities and addressing the needs. And one approach that I've been using since being in this role since last November is our platform for volunteer management. And the first thing I always say is build your profile. It's a free to you opportunity to put information in about yourself. And you could put it in for as an employer. You can put it as an employee. You can put it in as if you're a part of another organization, a sorority or a civic group in town. So you can come here to put your information in, just to say, here I am, I'm getting my information in my profile. You can use it as a formalized record to record your hours of volunteer opportunities. A great way to first be connected to anyone's platform and portal. I know that Love Out Loud uses the same Galaxy Digital portal as we use. Matter of fact, United Way is a listed agency under that portal. So we find a lot of value in connecting people with one place or several places to get information. So my first go-to is put your profile into our portal. It gets you connected with what we're doing, and it allows for communication with our volunteers or potential volunteers. And here recently, we've noticed opportunities for high school students and our college students to be a part of the portal, and for their organizations to be a part of the portal. So that's something that we're promoting pretty soon, is to get those groups involved or connected to the portal, just to get them started, to get them connected to how formalized the fun aspects of volunteer work can be for the community and for them.
Excellent. Again, just a wealth of information being shared here. And so we'll go into our audience Q&A. So if you have a question for our panelists, please drop those in the chat. And so we can answer those at this time. And while we are kind of waiting for those to come in, I did have one to kind of start us off. This makes it a little bit personal, but what has been, what have you learned from your biggest, smallest volunteer project? What have you learned? What has impacted you? I know a few folks on here have done some large projects or maybe a small project. What have you learned by putting together some of these larger and smaller projects that you would want to share with not only volunteers, but also other nonprofit agencies?
Cedric, I'll jump in. My first job, I'll call it a job, was a volunteer job. And it was with the Delta Fine Arts Center here in Winston-Salem. And it was stuffing, I think it was 10,000 pieces of mail. Because, you know, mail back in the day was the way you communicated with folks. And that actually got me started with how you organize information and materials. And through my sorority, I'm a member of Zeta Phi Beta sorority, and we have a national, actually international partnership with March of Dimes. And for 6 years, I was the international March of Dimes coordinator for the sorority, which enabled us to do awareness building programs and fundraising programs. And that was an international role. So we were all over the country and in some countries like Africa and in some other countries across the globe, in England, that kind of thing. So, but the main thing I learned with that, and the most important thing, was organization and structure and communication, because we interacted with folks that represented different regions, individual members, and even March of Dimes, and there were chapters at that time with different states and different communities to organize awareness activities, set goals for folks. So we had a fundraising goal every year that we met and exceeded. And all those things were about organizing and that kind of thing, because we didn't want the lack of information, lack of organizing to impact how people were really feeling, experiencing why they wanted to give money to this organization, the March of Dimes. But the main thing was the organizing opportunities for people to feel compelled and connected to the work and the why. And so that's what I figured out, because, you know, like I mentioned before, doing volunteer work and organizing volunteer opportunities should never be something that's willy-nilly, because folks who are involved in volunteer work are professionals, they're passionate, their time is very valuable. So what you do at the front end, even at the back end, symbolizes a lot of good things in the center, because if a person has a really good experience because of the time you put into it, they're going to return. Like they say, well, you know what, I like how they communicated how I'm to sign up or to register. I had very few questions about giving my money if I needed to give some information. If there was a situation or emergency that happened, they came right away to take care of that. Or I was able to connect with someone who was on the volunteer site and see how my time impacted them positively. So a lot of those nuances behind the scenes of logistics really helps the volunteer have their pure experience, their genuine experience in helping out with what that is. And even though the focus should not be on the strict reward and recognition of volunteer, I mean, that's not why I ever do volunteer work, but even that is important. Just like the young man who's going to be recognized in the next couple of weeks in the Enrichment Center for his work, he was very humbled by that. You know, I think that whatever he decided he wanted to do, what his passion was, to be recognized for that, I think is very critical, important, and to be celebrated. So I'm thinking about, you know, the organizing, the logistics behind the actual volunteer assignment itself is very critical, what I learned, because it's going to really impact positively that volunteer's experience for that one time and even for their lifetime.
Excellent. All right, we have couple questions in the chat, but I want to give Liz and Amy a chance to respond to that. What have you learned from organizing some of these big volunteer projects? And I kind of think, I don't know if Liz, you want to touch on, I know you guys do a big one every year. What have you learned?
Oh, I don't know what we do every now. I mean, we do Christmas for the city every year, which the largest year we had 1,200 volunteers doing all kinds of different things. I think I have learned a lot about myself and the way I like things to work. I've also learned how to be flexible because things don't always work the way I want them to work. And it's much more important, even if I'm, uncomfortable, it's much more important for the volunteers to be engaged in something that they find meaningful and they find passionate. I think my biggest lesson actually came the first summer I worked in Live Out Loud about a lot of years, 8 years ago. And we were doing a shoe distribution and it included washing of kids' feet. And I was so excited because I love just the spiritual component of washing feet and being a servant. And at one point, my boss came up to me and he said, you can sit down and you can do this service, but you're going to have to decide at some point, do you want to be the one washing feet, or do you want to be the one organizing the event that allows volunteers to be the ones washing the feet? And I think as individuals in this sector that help guide volunteers to things that are really meaningful to them, we have to decide, do you want to be the one, doing the thing? Do you want to be the one making something incredibly meaningful through your particular talents and gifts and skills and passions? Or do you want to be the one organizing something that's broader, that impacts the community in a deep way, that allows volunteers to be impacted in a deep way, that gives avenues for people to do service? And it is a decision that we all have to make from an organizational perspective, on kind of where our mission is, where our goal, where we plant our feet. Are we just trying to fit our strategic goals and make ourselves comfortable and have the nice stories and reports to tell our donors and the foundations and to tell our story in a beautiful way? Or are we going to organize an infrastructure and a system that allows the community to really invest in the work that they're doing and people to delve in and get their hands dirty in meaningful ways?
Beautiful.
I think that's a great point. I was just thinking some of my biggest learnings actually come from some of the smaller events that we do. We do these relatively intimate board speeding events in a variety of settings. And we did one relatively recently with a boutique professional firm in town that I would have thought was relatively engaged. They work with a lot of nonprofits. And we brought in 8 very diverse nonprofits for their professionals to date around potential board service. And some of those nonprofits were new and grassroots and very small, and we weren't necessarily expecting them to have heard of those nonprofits. But some of them were large and had been in our community for 30 or 40 years. And the organizer, when I sent her, said, these are the folks the organizations we're going to recommend, the organizer came back to me and said, that's great because I've only vaguely heard of one of them. And that really kind of was a little eye-opening about, even if you think you're well established, even if you think you're doing good work, there's always more communication that can be had around needs and opportunities and what is out and what exists in our community, as well as I think reframing the fact that a lot of service has always happened and will continue to happen outside of formal channels, right? That a lot of neighboring happens in our community, and how do we recognize and lift that up? And also the recognition that this is in some ways a great privilege to do this work of kind of sparking change and mobilizing our community to do work. To speak of the Governor's Volunteer Service Awards, which is the event that Tosh referenced, one of our very first of those events, we actually recognized Reverend Chrisman with a Governor's Award. And he came up to me after that event and he goes, don't you feel lucky to do this? And I said, I sure do. And, I've been involved with the Governor's Awards in some form or fashion since 1998. And it can sometimes feel a little old hat to those of us doing it, as I'm sure all of us in the volunteer engagement space can be. And for those volunteers who are recognized and those stories that we get to uplift and amplify the impact that we can share, it's so meaningful for those volunteers. And for them, it often is, like this gentleman from the Enrichment Center and Reynolds, a once in a lifetime honor and opportunity and experience. And so that's sort of our North Star in a lot of ways, is recognizing the power in service and how can we share that power with as many people as possible.
Absolutely. Again, just love hearing these learnings and just these stories that go along with some of the things that you're sharing. And so we do have a question, as well as a opportunity for those who want to engage in the chat. We have a question about what has been your favorite volunteer project to support, participate, and why. So if you feel like you want to answer that question, you can. And then we have a question from Brooklyn that says, how do we mobilize more people from the general public to care about their communities and get involved in something they care about? So how do we mobilize more people from the general public to care about their communities and to get involved in something they care about? Anybody want to take a shot at that one?
So the first thought I had was, there are a lot of people who care about the community, but they may be doing it without like media attention. And that's okay. And but there are other folks who are doing it as a part of a group or an organization or individually that are doing this work without us knowing it. So I think part of what we can do is really show those stories or encourage people to share their experiences on a broader scale, so people know for sure that people do care about their community. I think that's a misnomer. Even though it's not on social media, it's not in the newspaper, it's not on the nightly news, there are people who really care about the community, and sometimes they want to be autonomous with that. It's not important for them to know. But if we can celebrate those stories on their behalf, that'd be great. And I think too, thinking about Forsyth County, there's 382,000 some people here. And that means that there's a lot to be done. There's a lot that has been done. And to mobilize those folks where they live, work, and play is really one of the greater opportunities we have to have them express through their work how they care about the community. I mean, one of the quotes I found for me with this work is by Mahatma Gandhi: the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. And that quote resonates so deeply with me, because sometimes we need that experience to really help us see who we are and what we can do in the service of others. So, a couple thoughts about that.
Yeah, and I think it's also the recognition, as you said, Tosh, that the work is happening, right? It just might not be happening through formal 501c3 organizations, and I think it's in some ways, that's why I talk about reframing what service and engagement looks like, so that we can recognize and align those efforts a little bit more, and show how we're all part of this mosaic that's going to create change, right? Because at the end of the day, it is about creating change and moving things forward, but it's also about recognizing where people fit into that. We talk about a wheel, and we talk about the civic circle, that is these 9 different kind of actions that you can take to move change forward, and service and volunteering is one of them, but it's not the only thing. But it's always that individuals kind of show up in the civic space. And I think the more that organizations kind of recognize that and can speak that language, the more likely they'll be able to attract those folks who maybe have been doing things informally, have been doing things just sort of on their own in a new way, and maybe be able to attract them to their more formal opportunities. I do think that's so important, because I think you leave a lot of people out if you just frame service and volunteering through the lens of the organizational work.
Excellent.
I think one of the biggest things that our community is really bad at is getting out of our spheres. We have very clear lines in Winston-Salem of the communities of privilege and the communities that are under-resourced. And there are individuals who live in communities that don't even realize what is on the other side of our city, don't even realize what is outside their bubble. They don't see the individuals that work 2 jobs and run a nonprofit on the side to make sure that their neighbors have food. They don't see the little free pantries set up on streets in East Winston to make sure that individuals are getting fed, or individuals are being mentored and getting their homework done, or families are staying safe. And without that getting outside of your bubble, there's not going to be any change in our community. So I say that not to be negative, but to encourage people that it's really important to find ways that you can be uncomfortable. I think kind of mobilizing people is also, one thing that Love Out Loud really finds our place doing is we have a program called Pathways that we actually meet with people, and we'll have conversations about, hey, where have you served in the past and it hasn't gone well, or it has gone well? Or are you passionate about a particular group of people or a particular cause? Or are you highly organized, or are you, more relational and grassroots and willing to sit at a table and talk to a bunch of strangers? And then how do we kind of fit all those things together and help you find those maybe under the radar service opportunities, or those creative service opportunities that you've never thought about? So we have, like Tash mentioned, we have the online database where you can do that a little bit for yourself, but we also have volunteers and staff members that love to sit down with individuals and talk through all those little nuances to help them find places and to help them maybe be uncomfortable on the arm of somebody who is comfortable in a space. So we're not asking individuals to just, hey, go find a street you've never been to in East Winston that looks a little different and knock on doors and figure out someone to help. But we are asking people to maybe step out of your comfort zone a little bit, have conversations with not the organizations with the top 5 marketing budgets that come up first when you type in volunteering in a Google search. But be willing to kind of step into something new and meet people different from you and have hard conversations and move in a direction that's really transformative for the community. And Love Out Loud loves to help people kind of on that journey to find what that looks like.
Absolutely. Again, just, excellent answers. We have a lot going on in the chat. We'll definitely have to get some of these links that are in the chat saved and emailed out to you all. Great information. One answer to the question Lisa mentioned about her volunteer opportunity or volunteer experience. She says, a lot of my spare time is spent volunteering, but I don't have a favorite. I just love to volunteer. This gives me way more than I could ever give them. And so they give me way more than I can ever give them. That's beautiful. Debbie from Habitat has mentioned a lot about how their volunteer base is growing based on their volunteers. And also, if folks are interested in their blueprint tours, definitely want to reach out to them. So as we get ready to close our program, if our panelists could just drop in the chat, if someone wants to volunteer with your organization, how do they contact you? How do they find out about getting set up to volunteer? So please drop that in the chat, how folks can get connected with you. And while they're doing that, I just want to thank them for taking their time again, Liz, Amy, and Tash, for just an engaging conversation around volunteerism. We will have another Front Porch conversation in May. And right now we're looking at having a conversation around digital equity. And so more information on that. And again, it is still National Volunteer Week and Global Volunteer Month. So if you have not volunteered, find one of these organizations, get connected, get out and serve. It'll be, I believe, a great experience, and maybe you'll find something that you're so passionate about. As one of our panelists said, it makes you come alive. And so thank you once again for being on our front porch. You guys have an amazing day and enjoy this great weather. We'll see you next time.
Thank you so much for this opportunity and everybody showing up.
Yes, thank you so much.